I'm Paul from Trending Who, What, Where, and When. Today I'll be speaking with the author, Fred Duffy, about his book, Adventures of a Serial Entrepreneur, Achievements Over Adversity. Fred will be joining us from Dublin, Ireland.
Good morning. My name is Fred Duffy. I'm the author of a book called The Adventures of a Serial Entrepreneur. I'm going to tell you a little bit about it, but behind me you'll see the Irish Sea. I hope sometime you may visit us in Ireland. The book is like, if you've heard of the Pearls of Pauline, it's an incredible story of success and threats. My life threatened, bombs in my oil refinery, arrested by the British police on suspicion of being an IRA bomber, but very many good things too. Built my own oil refinery, became a champion tomato grower, was voted the businessman of the year in my community, and by and large I've had a very exciting life, which is all in this book. It's a page turner. I hope you'll read it. You will not be disappointed. So, thank you. Dublin has 1.2 million people, and it's the capital of Ireland, which has a population of 5 million. So it's very small in comparison to the United States. We have the pleasure here of living in what we call a leafy suburb, surrounded by leisure events. For example, just across the road here is the Royal Dublin Society. It was formed in 1780. That's a long time ago. I'm opening the gates now and I'll show you where I live, and it's a piece of history that I think will be interesting. Come with me. The building we're going to see just now is a relic of a castle built in the reign of King Richard III of England. We're standing now beside what was originally a Norman tower. Ireland being a small, unprotected country with no armies, I'm going back 1,000 years now, we were known as the Island of Saints and Scholars, and that made us ripe for attack by the famous Vikings who came from Denmark and raided the city. They settled here, married some of the Irish women, and in fact founded Dublin, probably halfway through the 1st century. Later on then came the Normans, who had come from France, had conquered England, and came to Ireland as a sideline. They arrived here, and they were particularly good at building what we call Norman towers. You will find Ireland is full of Norman towers, and this is one of them, built in the reign of Richard III of Britain in the year 1350, and served a very useful purpose as a castle protecting the local ford across the river. However, the Norman knights were always competing for territory, and they fought on this site in 1780, introduced us nicely to the city of Dublin, which is a very historical town indeed. You will find many museums here, many artifacts dating back for centuries. It's also famous for its literature, its culture, its poetry, its art, and some gems that we will tell you about later. I think that you'll find more than enough to occupy several days, if not weeks, exploring the gems, the hidden gems of Dublin. Thank you.
I'll begin by asking you to tell our followers your favorite spots in and around your home of Dublin where you would take your family and friends when they come to visit you.
Yes, I'm happy to share that with you. It's some very simple things. Probably the National Gallery would be probably the first.
Okay.
We have got an advantage with the National Gallery. Remember, we're a very small country with limited budgets, But George Bernard Shaw left the proceeds of his work to the state, and that didn't amount to very much until My Fair Lady was filmed. When his story was turned into My Fair Lady, it produced a cash flow that enabled the Irish National Gallery to buy some of the best paintings in the world that we otherwise couldn't have afforded. So that's one of the best things. The other one that is rather special is in Dublin Castle, and that is an American copper billionaire who made his money in South Africa. And when he was a collector, as was his wife, and they built up one of the biggest collections in the world. And he fell out with the British government for tax reasons. He wasn't the first one or the last. So he brought the whole collection to Ireland. It's a quite incredible collection, probably in the top 5 in the world. When I say he was a collector, I mean he didn't just collect, for example, a Bible. He collected the first Bible. He didn't collect just the Muslim, the Quran. He had collected the oldest Quran and the smallest. You'll see the smallest Quran in the world there. He then had a Japanese phase, so he became an expert in Japan and so on. He has a quite remarkable collection. That would be one of the things. The other things I would like would be, I think, just shopping in Grafton Street. Most people have seen Grafton Street. Then I like to sail. So I'm a member of the Dunleary Yacht Club, and I go, every time I can, I go out on the water there. It's safe. We rarely get severe storms. Beyond that, I write a lot, so that doesn't let me out much. The races at Phoenix Park, always a pleasure.
I was amazed at the diverse range of businesses that you built into successes, the huge number of important business people and government people that you worked with, and the large number of cities and countries that you lived and worked in. I look forward to reading your future books.
Well, it has been a very exciting life. I like risk, I like excitement, and essentially one thing led to another. If anyone reads my book, they'll realize that I was lucky to get a job. You know, in the 50s, and 60s, there wasn't a lot of work around, and I was lucky to. It started really with the Merchant Navy. Going into the Navy knocked off the rough spots. It turned me from a gauche country boy into a fairly experienced sailor that had been around the world. It did no harm when I came to join Shell to be able to mention that I'd been in the Alcantara Club in Buenos Aires and been in the Sol Havana Club in Havana. No harm at all to have that sort of sophistication. It also taught me how to conduct myself in society. And it's largely because of that when I applied for the job in Shell, it was an upper middle class job. I was competing with lieutenant colonels and people from all walks of life, including many professionals, architects, engineers, accountants, and I had no qualifications at all. That's one of the funny things. I'm not an academic, therefore I had no time for studying much, but getting into Shell was the key to everything else. There I saw the first opportunity of oil being wasted, oil being thrown down the shores. In those days, it wasn't like today where the EPA is watching everything. People just dumped it. I thought it had a value, which I was right, it was. I thought if I could collect it, we could find a way to clean it up and make it combustible, that we could sell it as a fuel. And that was the idea, but the question is how to get there. I think if anyone reads my book, you'll see that I had only £15,000, quite a lot of money in those days, but still not enough. To get where I wanted to be, eventually I built the oil refinery. It cost over £1 million, which would be 4 million today. So to get to there, I had to find some method of making, what I call a hen and an egg. I couldn't produce the egg if I didn't have a hen to generate the cash flow. So I looked around for energy was my job. I had learned how to burn oil with Shell. I knew where to burn it and the type of equipment that it required. So looking around for a high energy usage in England would have been very easy because there are lots of furnaces and big boiler houses there. But in Ireland, it was an agricultural country. There weren't many opportunities for large consumers of oil. So I happened on the tomato industry. Purely a hen to get an egg. It was not that I liked tomatoes. I had no background in horticulture. But I happened on a small book for which I paid 2 cents, 2.5 cents. It's called Her Majesty's Stationery Office, Grow Your Own Tomatoes. And with that little 20-page book, I started a small little industry and built it from a 1/4 acre to 1/2 acre and so on, finally up to 4.5 acres, which is 200,000 square feet, employing 100 people. And one of my skills, as it were, is I look for good people. And I've been saying this throughout my life. You watch out for good people, and when you see them, they're gems, grab them, give them an offer they can't refuse, and bring them into the team. I did that with a man called Jan Moret from the practical technical side. And then we went looking for a horticultural grower. We went to England and found him. I found a young man who turned out to be wonderfully at sales and organization. So he finished up a director of the company. And with that team, I built this tomato farm. And that's when we got the cash flow up and enough oil, enough demand for oil. We then required 200,000 gallons a year. That's a big consumer. It meant I could start collecting my own oil and learning how to burn it, and told Shell to stop delivering. We started delivering it using our own. And that built into an oil recycling plant, which became my major success, in fact.
Then afterwards, you also built the National Enterprise Agency in 1984.
Whenever I sold, when I got Atlas complete, by that I mean it was up and running, very profitable, and the time to move on. I had been in the oil business for 28 years by that stage, and I had been there, done that. Let's look for other opportunities. At that stage, I was fairly well known in Irish industry, and one of the agencies, one of the national agencies, approached me and asked me to join them as a consultant, as an analyst. The idea was that we were going to be a lender of last resort. If entrepreneurs came along with good ideas without sufficient funds, we would perhaps step into depth where the banks wouldn't. The banks were never great for supporting enterprise. That's why it was called the National Enterprise Agency. So my job was to analyze a number of applicants with various ideas. And that is what I did for just a short period. And then one of the investments was in the Irish Health Development Corporation. And that was the idea. We had seen our nurses and our medical people being pinched, being borrowed by American enterprise, bringing our skilled people into Saudi Arabia, and the profit going to America. And we said, well, why wouldn't we do that ourselves? Why wouldn't we be the people to employ our own doctors and dentists and nurses? So we set up that agency, and I started as a consultant, but soon they again appointed me. They persuaded me. I didn't really want to go to Saudi Arabia, but they persuaded me to become the general manager and then to become the managing director, and to bid for contracts. And we got a pretty good one, a $20 million contract, which, remember, many years ago would probably be 100 million today. And that was a success, quite a bit of fun, kept me busy for a couple of years until I had done it, and then I moved on. I sold everything. Up to that point, I sold everything at I got a lot of money, quite a lot. I never found a consultant who could give me the right advice where to invest it. So I put it into the stock market, which with hindsight was not a good idea, but I put some into property as well. I bought 3 properties down in Tenerife. And again, I was a very experienced businessman. I like to think I could judge people. And so we picked a contractor who I would think I know he was the best in the Canary Islands. But a slump came, he crashed, and with me, a great deal of money invested went out the window. So I was beginning to feel the pain a little. And then I had put my name down as one of the members of Lloyd's of London. We were called names. Why, I don't know. And again, I researched it backwards. And in my book, I insist it was a reasonable investment, certainly risk, but on balance, profitable. What I wasn't allowing for is that there were a lot of crooks there. Now, Lloyd's of London had and has an international reputation going back over 200 years, maybe 250. Ultimate honesty. There's a Latin word now, semper fides. I trusted them, and I was wrong. They took $500,000 off of me. $500,000 is a lot of money to lose.
And you moved on to creating Greenman Toners Limited?
So it was time to go back to work. Simply that. Go out and do it again. And this time, at that stage, and in my book, I say, I had to find out, was it pure luck the first time, or could I do it again? Well, I did it again. I found another opportunity, one you'll be familiar with today, inkjet. Prior to those days, the computers were noisy, the printers were noisy. They were really just typewriters, glorified typewriters. But the idea of a toner cartridge was invented, and I saw it as being a beautiful machine, which was being dumped when empty, like you throw your car away when the petrol is used. It defies belief. So I looked into it and found the methods of recycling it, and we started up in my back kitchen, Helen and I, and we built it up into fairly big. We had, I think, 5 factories in mostly England, but Bulgaria, Spain, with a distribution warehouse in Maastricht in Holland. We employed nearly 400 people, about 370 people in three countries. And that was a wonderful experience.
You knew you were going to be an entrepreneur once you had successfully bought the property and built 2 houses on it, sold 1 house for all your costs.
See that it started much earlier than that. While working for Shell and for employed and needing the salary, I was all the time looking around to see what I needed to get on my own. I had a deep yearning to work for myself. There were 1 or 2 reasons for that. I didn't have a qualification, as I mentioned earlier, and I was not a manager. Nobody ever called me the magic word manager. I was never one. So to make myself a manager, I had to do it myself. That was one of the motivations. That was while working in Shell. So whenever I got married, what happened next was just incidental. My wife, Helen, wanted to live, she said, within 400 meters of the post office. She wanted to be in the center of town. And she defied me to find a site or a house that I could afford. So I found one, a house with a big garden beside it, fronting onto the street. And it was pretty obvious to me that would make a very good site for townhouses if I could buy it, which I was able to buy it at a reasonable price. And then I built it by direct labor. By that I mean I didn't pay a contractor. I was my own contractor.
Oh.
And we built them for from memory, we built the two for £4,000, Irish pounds, and sold one of them for £4,000, which meant we had our first home beside the post office.
That's incredible. I'm surprised you didn't stay right in the real estate business and just start building small cities with
Well,
that.
that's a good question, because would like to emphasize, I find it very difficult to leave the security of a good job. And there's nothing more secure than that was a lifetime job to be employed by Shell. And I was a fairly senior, upper middle management. To leave that and go out into the risk world, I find it extremely difficult. And if it had not been for a friend of mine who had left Shell, he persuaded me to join him, gave me an offer I couldn't refuse, and appointed me sales director of a company that was importing boilers for America. Young, married with 2 children, one is 2.5 and one is 3 months, to set off with that family, leaving Sligo, where we were totally established. By that time, I had been appointed Businessman of the Year in Sligo. I was fairly well established there. To go to Dublin, where we had no contacts and no friends, was quite a leap into the unknown. It was tough. But my first job, just like previously, I had to find a house. So I went looking again, and I found the same deal as I did in Sligo. I found a house with a big garden beside it, fronting onto the road. So I said, well, it worked before, why not work again? And it did. So the house I bought was a big, huge monster, which I was going to turn into apartments. I could have put 7 apartments there, and I built a lovely house next door to it. I was already into property development. That would have kept me happy. We could have made a good home. It's a nice area, Dunleary, which I still love. I could have lived in that house and turned the 7 apartments into a pension, and probably would have gone on into property development. But I still had this love for oil. And at that stage, by total coincidence, holidaying in Sligo one Easter weekend, I met an old school chum who had been in the tobacco business. He offered his business to me for a price that I could afford. So 12 months after leaving Sligo, we came back to Sligo again to build our tomato farm. So that's what prompted me back into the oil business.
I was amazed reading your book too. You had a real advantage when the oil prices started rising. They rose greatly, and that must have hugely helped you with your business in the oil.
It absolutely changed our cash flow. It quadrupled it. It just went from $3 or $4 a barrel to, I think, 15 or 20, and then that never stopped. It was that suddenly. It was a Yom Kippur War, I think it was, and then that was the 6-day war. There were 2 wars, as you probably remember. But beyond the Israeli problems, the OPEC, the consortium of oil industries, got tired of being ripped off by the major oil companies, so they went into their own process of taking control of their products and looking for equitable prices. So that kept putting the price up and up and up, and we laughed all the way to the bank. Without that huge increase in cash flow, we probably wouldn't have been able to afford the oil refinery. But there was a problem too, because at one point you obviously look at the accounts and say, well, let's split the 2 businesses, the tomato business with the oil business, which can stand on its own 2 feet. And we realized that we were subsidizing the tomatoes with expensive oil that we could have sold for very much higher sums to strangers. So it was time to close down the tomato farm. And that was very sad, because we had very good, loyal employees there. But we paid also, how do you do it? If you've got 4 acres of glass and miles of steel piping for heating, miles of tubing for air conditioning, it's a huge job to take. We built it up over 6 years, but to take it down requires a great deal of skill. But unfortunately, I had this magnificent manager who I had hired out of England, my horticultural director. So that was his job. Bill, I said, take it down and clean it and leave the soil clear and ready for development. And here comes the second. Again, I mentioned luck a lot. And the luck it plays a big part in all our lives. I'm sure yours too, Paul. And here was something totally out of the blue. I had bought that land because I wanted to build a business and create a cash flow. What I hadn't allowed for was that piece of land was within the borough boundary. And within the borough boundary, it is subject to, you're allowed to build houses and build lots of houses. So I was approached by several builders who wanted to buy the land from me to build houses, which we did. We did a deal with one of them. And today there are probably 50 or 60 houses built there now. Young people living on them, never knew the background.
So after all of this, what inspired you to become a writer?
There's nothing worse than being out of work.
Okay.
Whenever I sold any of those businesses, the first one was when I sold the oil business for a chunk of money, and I retired and I went to England just because I love England as a country. I love the countryside, like the people. But I had no work. I had nothing to do. And unemployed is awful. The days drag on. So you've got to find something to do. And that's why I did these various jobs, like working for the NEA and the Irish Health Service Development. They were to keep myself busy. But when eventually we sold the last business, the Greenman Toners, I was in the same situation. Only now I was 74. So I was not young enough to start up another business. But the reality is that writing is a business. Writing is very much a business. And what started me into it was my children and my wife. I wouldn't say pressured me, but persuaded me, constantly say, Fred, you've been through all these different adventures, write them down and tell us what happened, and so that we'll know that whenever you're gone, we can look back. So that's what started me. I wrote it as a private business, a private book at home. I never published it, just 100 copies for friends. That was 10 years ago. But time passed, and one night I had an experience where I got a yearning to write a book about Rockefeller and Gulbenkian. That's a book I could tell you about, quite a lot about if you give me time. But that prompted me to say, I'm going to write about this. And when I started to write it, I wrote it, and it's written, but it's waiting to be edited. It's not ready for publication yet. But that got me back into the habit of writing, and I realized I loved it. When you sit down to write, it's wonderful.
So do you write longhand or do you type onto a computer?
I do a combination of things. I write longhand and then dictate it by dictation. If you're writing longhand, Jeffrey Archer, for example, is probably one of the best known writers in these islands. He's probably written 15 to 20 successful books, many of them turned into movies. He writes longhand, so I take my consolation from him. I'm not unique. If it works for him, nothing wrong with doing it. I find it gives me the opportunity to think and rethink again. It's easy with a pen and paper or pencil and paper to cross out words and put a new word in. It's very much easier doing that than on a computer.
Speaking from your successful experience, what is necessary to be a successful entrepreneur?
I'm currently writing a follow-on book to my own. The one I've written was How I Became an Entrepreneur. I'm writing one called So You Want to Be an Entrepreneur, which is a kind of cynical look at the whole abuse of the word entrepreneur. It's the most abused word in the English language because it's thrown at every job, and everybody picks up any sort of a job or starts a small little business. They call themselves entrepreneurs. It isn't so. An entrepreneur is something rather different. And I'm really not sure if I should talk about it now. It would take too long. But writers, going back to the 17th century, have been trying to define what makes an entrepreneur. So I'm writing a book on that, the background, the history, the definition and the difference between being an inventor, a manager, and an entrepreneur. The three different things. I think it's quite, to me, it's important. It's worth writing about and trying to persuade the young kids. It's very cool. I got this from my grandchildren. It's very cool nowadays for young children to say, I'm an entrepreneur. I've got my own car and I go overseas on business. And what they're not saying is it's their daddy's money and they're playing with it and they don't know anything about it. Being an entrepreneur, like anything else, is just hard work and a bit of skill and a bit of little je ne sais quoi, a little something else, a little edge to it. One professor, Harvard professor, Joe Schumpeter, he described an entrepreneur as having a spirit, a magic spirit that enhances his work. That work doesn't become work, it becomes a devoted, almost a religion. And that might define the difference between an entrepreneur and a manager. But it might be presumptuous of me to say that, but I'm going to write a book on those lines.
In the book I just read of yours, it looked like you did a lot of research. You weren't just content with the way things were. You researched it and did experiments and things to try and determine the best way to get more yield or things like that.
Oh, absolutely. But it's basically the whole business. And the case of the tomato business, remember I started with a little pamphlet learning how to grow tomatoes. That's fair enough. And I knew I required CO2 enhancement of the atmosphere. I knew it required heating. I knew a fair number of things, but I wasn't professionally qualified to handle things like manganese dioxide, problems that you meet in culture. So that's why I went looking. When I got it to a viable stage where we can afford it, I then started building onto the technology and look for people who can bring in more productivity. We would grow our tomatoes, I think, to about initially 60 tons an acre, but we brought in people who brought them up to 80 tons an acre, which of course made all the difference in terms of profitability. When it came to the oil business, I got rather a shock because I had been, as I mentioned earlier, I had been upgrading the contaminated oil to a level where the specification in terms of sulfur and so on was acceptable for combustion, for burning as a fuel. But along came the European Union and said, it's too good a product to burn as a fuel. Let's turn it back into lubricant oils. The right way and the best way to do it. So with my team of managers and my wife, Helen, who was always beside me, we went and became friends and part of a very little niche industry, the recycling of oil, which wasn't very well known. The European Union of International Lubricant Manufacturers, EUIL. So I became a member of the presidium there and became reasonably expert. I could say we probably could become quite expert. I built a team of chemists and we tried to improve our product to the point where the Irish government would accept our recycling procedures and were prepared to let us get a planning permission. They would. Today, you were not allowed to burn that oil.
And you built the oil business into a fairly large business before you left it.
Yes, and it went on beyond that. I built it into quite a large business and a very profitable one, and I was happy to take my cut on the success and move on. But the people who bought it were investors who took a different view, looking just for return on money. And various people became involved. They went through three different levels of owners. And the current owner, I should go back a little bit. When we started collecting the used oil, it became inevitable almost that industries who had used oil had vessels that had carried it and were now contaminated. So they needed somebody or some firm to clean up that waste. So every time in business I found this, whatever you do, you always find a side issue that creates another opportunity. For example, take a small ship a little coaster coming out of Dublin don't smile at me. These coasters were carrying Guinness to England, but we weren't involved in the Guinness side, but we were involved in the oil side. If they had a tank in the ship that was an oil that was contaminated, it wasn't just that we would take the oil away. We would be asked to go in and clean up the tank to make it clean for good oil. Nothing with Guinness, just the oil. And so we started cleaning as a tank cleaning company, simply that, at this tank cleaning company. But it grew and grew and grew. And with further investment by outsiders, today it is the largest environmental agency in these islands and one of the largest in Europe. They employ 1,300 people, which is quite a lot of people given to cleaning, collecting. Oh, now they're into everything, paints, chemicals, you name it, they recycle it. So my little baby started off in oil. It's grown up into quite a big business now.
And during all of this, you managed to have a happy family life and have 4 children.
Yes, that's the best part, I would think. And the best thing about it, Paul, is they're all best pals. They've turned out to be entrepreneurs. No wish of mine. If you look at one of the websites up on the web, you'll see what my daughter said, how she was influenced without knowing it. The 2 of my children did philosophy. Now, philosophers are not out to make a bomb, they're out to reform the world. And Noam Chomsky and people like that are more their bailiwick than how to make a million. And blow me, but they've all turned around and turned into entrepreneurs at later life. And like Sinead at one stage was totally devoted to correcting the world, helping the world. She was handing out soup on Saturday nights on O'Connell Street in Dublin, handing out soup to poor, down and out people. You had to have your soup whether you liked it or not. And here now she's very heavily into a lovely, lovely business, but it's a wellness business, typically. It's about wellness, Yoganda. And the other son in London has just produced an artificial intelligence program, working together with some Ukrainians and Indian technicians, etc. My daughter Suzanne is just coming out brand new with an idea. She wrote 7 books, which is entrepreneurial in itself, gave up when she had a lovely family of 5 children. But now the children are growing up, she's gone back to a totally innovative idea, which I think is brilliant. I think the name as itself is brilliant. The United Tales of America. And she will tell a tale about every state in the United States, 51 states, one at a time. The first one was the dragons from Delaware, the Delaware Dragons. These are fiction with little anecdotes. The market is for children between 3 and 8, 3 and 8. Just little children who can look at them while their mummy is shopping or something.
In your book, you had many unusual situations you found yourself in due to your businesses or situation in life, starting with a dinner with the President of Ireland.
Yes, I would say I probably find myself in lots of strange situations, some of them more pleasant than others. I was one of the few people in my year in college who had a set of tails, white tie and tails. The old gear was brass, it was gold buttons down the front. Very nice outfit, had been bought by my family for me, don't know why. It was the thing in those days. It actually was the thing. In a county town like Monaghan, we would have balls, dressed dances, if you like, and tails was the thing. So one of my friends one day rang me and said, "Fred, you've got these tails. I need your help." Princess Claudia von Habsburg is the German princess who has been given a home because of the war by the President of Ireland. She's coming 21 and they want to have a party for her, but she has no friends. So I was offered the opportunity, but they didn't offer me any transport. So there I arrived at, we call it Oris and Uachtaráin, which means the home of the president. I arrive at Orange Neutron in my bicycle with my tails tucked into my pants, and then parked the bike, knocked on the door, and then welcomed as a VIP by the intercom in beautiful army uniform, saluting as though I were a prince. And we had a good dinner and a pleasant evening. Cycled home.
At one point, you had your life threatened because of one of your businesses?
Certainly was not pleasant. Background on that is that you know of the Northern Irish problems. The IRA were in serious conflict with the British authorities. And at one particular stage, Maggie Thatcher was a tough lady who gave no quarter to guerrillas. So when the IRA men went on hunger strike, she refused to give an inch. So a number of them were close to dying of hunger strike, one in particular, and the tensions were extremely high. And we had a factory there. We were collecting the oil in Northern Ireland. We had about 4 oil trucks on the road. Well, an oil tanker is kind of a nice thing to blow up if you want to create a bit of trouble. But the police in Britain, in Northern Ireland, advise us every day when to stay at home, when not to go out. But tensions rose very steeply. And in the area where we had our factory, which was called Clara Valley, some of the, if you like, IRA supporters decided they would close every factory in the valley. I think there were 7 factories, all to be closed in sympathy for this man who was dying. So my manager, the man I had brought, a manager, he had tried to settle in Northern Ireland, found it, he was an Englishman, is an Englishman, still alive and well, I'm glad to say. Bill, he couldn't take it anymore, and he rang me and said, Fred, I need to get out of here. My life is being threatened. Well, it's my responsibility. I'm the owner. So I said, Bill, get out of here. Come down to our factory in refinery and find something to do there, and I'll go up. So I arrived up, and within 24 hours, he had been called a British bastard. I was called an Irish bastard or something like that. They certainly knew I was there. They knew I was in town. And they said, you're no better than the last guy, so close down or we'll shoot you. I think that call was made about 5 times. The British Army were there, who normally wouldn't be my friends, but they were there. They helped me a lot. They offered me helicopters to get me out if there were any problems. They offered me a flak jacket, a British Army flak jacket, which I couldn't tolerate. That'd be too much. And one unionist, by unionist I mean Protestant MP, Harold McCusker, rang me and said, Mr. Duffy, if they meant to kill you, they wouldn't tell you. You'd be dead.
Yeah.
If they're telling you they're going to kill you, it won't happen. So that was a lot of consolation. But the real crunch point came when we got a call to say, okay, we haven't shot you yet, but we put a bomb in your tank. And we want all the factory, we want that factory closed down. We're not going to tolerate anymore. If you're not out of there by 11 o'clock next Tuesday, the bomb will go off in tank number 5. So this, Paul, became a challenge between intelligence and emotions. We looked at tank number 5 and tank number 4. We had 12 tanks, and we looked at them all. And there was a sort of 30-foot high tanks. Nobody goes up 30 feet. It takes off a huge manhole to put a bomb in it. And if they did, you'd certainly find you'd see the results, you'd see the footmarks and so on. It was clearly, there was nothing in the tank, clearly. And the question was that to use that knowledge and control your emotions. So I said to the guys, you're all out at 10:30, leave the factory and let the word go down the valley that I stood beside the tank at 11 o'clock, and I defy you to blow it up.
I don't quite understand how the banks could have strikes for 6 months in when you were in business. The banks you were dealing with would be on strike. You said for like 6 months.
I can't understand it either.
It sounds like it caused you a lot of difficulties.
And for the whole country. And you know, again, I'll probably write a blog on this because the story has got lost so long ago, people have forgotten it. And I've read little bits. Oh, it wasn't much. It wasn't really much. It was a short hiccup that didn't cause any problems. Not so. It caused a hell of a lot of problems.
Yeah.
And in my town of Sligo, it put 7 or 8 good businesses out of business. One in particular we have, where I brought in Italian designers to design object art, if you like, collectible pieces, beautiful, beautiful pieces. Some of them with the Irish culture of leprechauns and old women with a pint of Guinness, lovely bits. They had a full order book, enough orders to keep them in production for a year. Sacked, out of business, because the banks were refusing to meet their commitments. As I said, it took 6 months. It was quite unprecedented. It hasn't happened since, but it's unbelievable, Paul. I don't know how it could be allowed to happen.
So you also had competitor espionage when you were in business.
That's a kind of a tough story. I don't think I want to go into that much.
Okay.
I was careful what I said in my book. I've put it in my book, but it was very, very dirty.
Okay.
It shouldn't have happened. They got inside the files of the Irish government and had access to my proposals, which were very unique proposals. Nobody else. We had researched stuff. We had found people in South Africa that we had done a joint venture with, technology transfer. It was very unique. And these people got into it by espionage and contacted these people and said, don't go with Duffy, we're more important than he is, etc. It shouldn't have happened. And the people in the government agency where it happened are still horrified when I complain about it, which I still do.
Okay, you were held on suspicion of IRA activity at one point.
Yeah.
You and 3 others, that were your wife and two other people that were with you.
We met the requirement totally because the police had identified enough rumors about other people, not us, about other people, that there was a Dutch person involved, there was a tall, dark-haired woman involved, and there was an English woman involved. They knew that, nothing to do with us. That was in their list of specification of who they were looking for. And then we turned up and we fitted the module to a T. But what happened was a remarkable series of coincidences. We were, of course, not IRA or anything near. We were the opposite, as you've heard, was being threatened and so on. This was simply, we were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And a series of things went wrong. Things you can't perhaps, one in particular you can't explain, is the boot of a brand new car. We couldn't open it. It was a brand new Hillman, you wouldn't know the name, it was a Hillman Hunter car. Lovely car, it was my own, only 2 months old, and we couldn't open the key. So coming in through customs in England, we couldn't open the key. And we were let through without being inspected. That was the first of a number of coincidences. Then we overnighted in a pub, one of those lovely English pubs where you can bed and breakfast. You can have, there was a restaurant across the road. We made quite a splash because we were kind of excited and full of fun. We drank a lot of Irish coffees, which were not normally drunk in that part of the world. So we made a bit of a, if you like, a bit of a show. And afterwards, the police said, well, were they doing that deliberately while one of their people snuck off and put a bomb? Because only a mile away, a bomb went off in an army barracks about a mile from where we were overnighting. It just was unbelievable. But anyway, next morning, they went looking for us and couldn't find us because I diverted to meet an old friend who was also recycling oil. He had a laundry, and was using the oil as a fuel for his boilers, steam boilers in his laundry. So we were comparing notes, had lunch with him, and that again looked like we were trying to avoid the main roads and then get back to our base, back to Liverpool to get back to Ireland. So a number of things added up, but the most extraordinary one of all was when we got to Liverpool. I went off and had a lovely dinner, came back to where our car was parked, and the English lady, who was the wife of my horticultural manager, she looked on the ground and saw something important. She picked it up and she went, "This is an important looking pass. It's in a pass for an inspector of Her Majesty's Customs. This pass would enable you to get into any warehouse in the whole of the Liverpool area. It's kind of important." Well, I said, "It certainly is." So put it in the glove compartment of my car. When I get back to Ireland, to Dublin, Sligo, I will post it back to Liverpool. Because it was 10 o'clock at night. There was nothing we could do about it. Return it safely in the post. But whenever we were held by the police, for all the reasons I've just mentioned, we were at the wrong place at the wrong time. They assumed we were the people who had put the bomb in the army barracks back near London. But worst of all, they thought we were the guys who had set off a bomb that blew up a lot of children. So when we were held, we had enough proof that we were honourable, decent business people, and they saw that quickly. I think by 2 a.m. in the morning. They held us overnight. They didn't arrest us. They were careful not to, because if we were arrested, would be on our record for life. They held us in an office at great inconvenience to themselves. Afterwards, we had a lot of review on it. And I was, of course, very cross. I had, I think, 32 questions I wanted to ask. And I only got as far as number 12. When he said, we'll be here for another week, but if you want to go home, we're holding the ship for you. We're actually holding the Irish ferry. But they won't stay forever. So you make up your mind. You want to sit here and talk about the problems, or you want to get in it. So one of the questions was this thing about at 2 a.m. in the morning, when we could see the people looking after were beginning to relax and smile and treat us like normal people. About 2 a.m. it suddenly changed. The atmosphere, the tension was back. The anger was back. They were all looking at us furtively. And unusually, 3 large men, by that I mean chief superintendents from the Yorkshire Police, the Rugby, there were 4 different police forces involved in that particular thing, all in one night. The statistics are in my book. I think it was 70 officers were employed to give us a quick clearance, because we either were or we weren't. If we were, we had to be held. If we weren't, let us go home and not destroy our reputation. So they cleared it. I think it was a brilliant piece. I think it was a brilliant bit of police work. But to find this idea that here was me with this, 3 guys at different stages every hour or so, somebody would come in and look at me very carefully and walk away, because I apparently was a lookalike of the owner of the security pass. And where was he, and why was the pass there? He was playing rugby that day in the north of Lancashire, about 50 miles away. So they sent police cars flying up to North Lancashire. They stopped the guy and said, "Is this your pass?" "Yes." "Where is it? Why are you not carrying it?" I lost it." "Where did you lose it?" "Don't know." "Where was your car parked last night?" So and so. So it turned out this guy was able to prove it was his pass, and he had parked where we found it. So that took the pressure off that, and so we were let go home. It was, but as I say in my book, when I first wrote that 10 years ago, it didn't seem that important. But when I wrote it this time, I thought, hey, wait a minute. This was probably the most dangerous situation I ever was in. Because if there hadn't been such good policemen, because some police did lie in other cases. In other 2 cases, policemen, superintendents were charged with perjury because they lied to get conviction. And if we had been in that situation, we might be there 20 years.
You were fortunate there. It's good that it turned out that well, that quickly. Tell us about your meeting with Karmapa, the second disciple to the Dalai Lama.
That's nothing to my credit. That's just that he was there, and we were there. Anyone who reads my book will see we've traveled a great deal. Really, I think I've been in 57 countries in all at different stages. And at that stage, we were in India, up the Himalayas, administration of Nepal, the people who've been kicked out of Nepal by the Chinese. They have their government in that particular spot, and the Dalai Lama normally would be there holding court, if you like. By that I mean praying and smiling and praying, sharing his love with the world. And he was in America at the time, otherwise we would have met him. Not on a personal level, yes, a personal level, yes. But he would hold court for perhaps 100 visitors, and we would all go up in turn to shake his hand and get a little badge from him, a little thing to put around our neck, a prayer bead, if you like. So he wasn't there, and his first, as we said in my book, his follower is a prisoner in China, a volunteer in China, volunteering as they do. So we had the second in command, and his sermon was translated into English, and it was pretty well the same thing as the Pope would say. It was love God and love your neighbor. It's what we'd all subscribe to. A nice, loving, serve your man, serve your fellow man, serve your God, serve your fellow man. A nice occasion, a very nice, interesting thing for security, etc. You had to leave all your stuff outside. So I left my expensive cameras without a thought, left them on the ground, just knowing they'd be safe.
You've gotten many honors from the businesses you've been in. Would you like to tell us about some of the honors you've received?
I'd like to qualify that a little bit. I really only received one, I would think, and it means a lot to me, that one. And that's a Businessman of the Year in Sligo by the Chamber of Commerce. I didn't know it was coming. I hadn't got an idea. As in all these situations, you're too busy working and your head down, you're not up looking around for what's going on around the countryside. But the Chamber of Commerce apparently had seen me start up the tomato farm and then start up the oil business. And the combination of the two, they decided that's quite an unusual achievement. So they just called me and said, we've elected you. Will you accept the award? Well, of course I said yes, I will. But there was the secretary there, Tony Torr, a good friend, Tony Torr, very officious sort of chap. And he said, so you're coming on? And I said, yeah, Helen will be with me. But, oh, no, wives are not permitted. It's men only. Well, I said, Mrs. Meldrum is a member. She's a woman. Yeah, but she's in business. She's got a big shop. I said, well, Tony, if Helen isn't there, I won't be there either. And so he acquiesced on that. And then he said, you'll be allowed to talk for 2 minutes. I said, forget it. I couldn't talk for less than 15 minutes. I'll have a lot to say.
Would you like to tell us about your upcoming books?
Yes, particularly, well, two of them are provocative. One, as I've just mentioned, is So You Want to Be an Entrepreneur. I will stir a few feathers there because I'll be a little bit cynical about the abuse, as I said earlier in this conversation. I'll be a little bit cynical about the abuse of the word entrepreneur. And I'll try to define the real one. And then I'll go on, please God, to tell people how to be an entrepreneur. In other words, it's going to be a how-to book. From concept to cash flow is how we put it. From concept to cash flow. Bringing the idea right through into business. I'll be trying to tell people how to do it to the best of my ability. So that's the next one. Beyond that, then is one that will interest you, Paul, and like everybody else, towards 90 and beyond. I think you can see how fit I am. Mm-hmm. I'm at the gym twice a week.
Really?
And I'm on bicycle another twice a week. So I'm keeping fit at 88. Well, I'm 87 going 88. But I didn't get here by accident. I've always exercised. I've always been careful. My mantra is exercise is the best medicine. I thought of the idea. I was in a hospital, in fact, when I got the idea. I've had my share of heart attacks and all sorts of things. I mean, the body breaks down. The human body breaks down, but the brain doesn't. The brain doesn't. The brain will be the brain will still be fully functioning when you are being breathing your last breath. So to use that magnificent brain to utilize what's left of your own body as best you can. I mean, I don't really want to go to the gym. I don't really want to go on my bike. But my brain is saying, come on, let's do it. Together we can survive. So it's a partnership between your brain and your body. As you know, I'm not telling you, people don't know. But what is interesting is my daughter, Sinead. Sinead is a very unusual person. So she will co-write the book with me, which to me is a great privilege. She'll be putting her attitude, and she's coming from a fair bit of knowledge in the Indian tradition. The name of her oils are Uganda. And I don't know if I mentioned, but yoga is yoga, and Ganda is the Sanskrit word for health. So she's put the two words together to call it Uganda. And she will have a lot to contribute about the function of the will and the spirit and the brain in our health. And so we're going to try and produce a book that will help people. The third book is the one that really got me back to writing. Gulbenkian is a bigger player in the oil industry than Rockefeller. He is a richer man. He was in the time. They were both the richest men at the time. Gulbenkian was a genius. And more importantly, to my view, and this is controversial, he was an entrepreneur, where Rockefeller was a damn good manager, one of the best managers in the world, but not an entrepreneur. Gulbenkian started from scratch, did his first innovation, writing his first book when he was a kid, and never stopped. So that's why I want to write that book. And it's written, but it's not quite right yet for publication.
Would you share with us any advice that you would have for new writers?
I'd be glad to, especially that last point. I was thinking about how would talk about writing a new book. You know, it's actually, and this has been an innovative thought for me, and made it surprise. It is actually starting a business. When you start to write a book, you actually start to write a business. The same things. You come up with the concept, and you fall in love with that concept, or you don't. If you don't, you won't write the book. If you fall in love with it, then you've got to decide the facts, research. You must identify your market. Many people make the mistake of writing a book for themselves. Okay, nothing wrong with that. But the normality would be to write a book for a designated target market. So you've got to think, is there a market? Would they buy it? That's the marketing. That's then you presumably you know how to write, you can spell. Most important thing is to have a Rouget's thesaurus beside you, that you can look up words that you aren't quite clear, sure of their application. The unusual thing they'll find when they start to write, and somebody has put this in a book, just write. Just don't talk about it. Write. Start writing. And big sheet of paper and a pen and pencil. I think that's better than the computer because it makes you think more. And out of your brain will come thoughts, words, and recollections that you didn't know you had. It's almost like a miracle. And that's why the thesaurus is there. I find words come into my mind that I've never actually articulated before. I must have read them somewhere, but my brain has it. And I look up the thesaurus, and there's the word, and it is, yes, it's appropriate for that line. So that would be and be prepared for hard work. It's very laborious, painstaking, and finally, edit, and edit again. Doesn't matter how many times you edit it, there will still. One of my readers yesterday pointed out two mistakes in my book. It's little ones. You will have heard of a Stuka aircraft, a German aircraft called Stuka. You will have heard of that, Paul, I'm sure. Well, there's two Ks in it. I only had one K. It was Smith spelled. And when the British, when the army, the American and British forces invaded France, I called it Overlord. In fact, it's not Overlord. It had another name. I've forgotten it now. So they'll always be some little thing you miss. I don't know if that helps or not, but it's a great bit of fun writing. I would encourage people to do it and enjoy it. Start to tell the book, you don't realize you're starting a business, because when you've made the book, created it, published it, nobody knows. Nobody knows. It's a challenge.
So what are you doing to market your book?
Publisher Weekly, a magazine called Publisher Weekly, are doing a paid $40, no, for $100 to have it reviewed, and that review will be out by the 5th of January, and we'll use that to try and tell people it's worth reading and so on. But apart from that, it's hard. What can you do?
So of all your accomplishments, which are you most proud of?
Yes, and this again is for advice to people starting a business. In most cases, I started it very small. We finished up in Atlas Oil was probably a fleet of 12 or 14 oil tankers, but I started with one, a little one. I bought it secondhand. It was a wreck from Gulf Oil with a twisted chassis, and when it rolled along the road, it went sideways like a crab. So it was called the Crab. And I bought that for peanuts and drove it myself for the first 2-3 weeks to prove that I could collect the oil, and I knew how to learn how to pump the oil. So we started small, and we did it again with Greenman Toners when we started Greenman. Not to make a big investment, because you're not sure if it's going to work or not. We started Greenman in the granny flat at the back of our house. We had a small little, what do you call it, granny flat. For granny, do you know what I mean by a granny flat? Yes. Where you put your grandmother.
Oh, okay.
You know, a little visitor's adjunct to the house. A rear bedroom window, a rear bedroom. That's where we started the business, the Greenman business. So in both cases, we started with peanuts and were able to grow big trees. I'm very proud of that. We didn't go off playing the big guy. Start small, see if it works.
Do you have any regrets?
I think I may have said in my book, or indeed today, may sound like I know it all, and the answer is no, I don't. I made some serious mistakes, and the biggest mistake of all was investing in 3 properties in Tenerife. Why didn't I just invest in one? Start small. When it's the opposite of what I just said. You say I had just a pocket full of money, and I wanted to make it work. So I bought 3 and lost quite a bit on that. And then I went into Lloyd's in London. You know, I didn't have to do that. I shouldn't have done that. I'm not the only one. Thousands and thousands of people lost their money. You may not have read the Lloyd's much, but we probably had 30 suicides. You know, it was a very, very, very bad time to be there, and I shouldn't have been there. I didn't need it, and I regret that very much.
Thank you, Fred. I really enjoyed this interview.
I enjoyed meeting you, Paul, and particularly enjoyed your taking an interest in my work. Thank you for that.